Welcome back to KMI Community Connect. This is going to be Metabolism Made Easy Part 9, viewers. I'm going to be going more deep, but at the same time very simple to understand, and I'll try to do best in terms of making it very easy for you. More into detail about AMP and the enzyme that activates it, which is AMP kinase. Kinase is something that activates it and makes the energy utilization. So that is what we want. And so before I get into that, we are going to get a little bit of perspective about what happens in the body in terms of energy. Every time we do something, our body needs energy and it stores energy. And it's like body goes through nice phases where you have to spend energy to make energy and to store. So spending energy is required to make some energy because you spend some energy while doing certain processes. So for instance, I'm going to go over, and last time when I spoke to you, I talked about how the body digests the food digests from the stomach into the intestine. So when it digests in the first part, for that you need energy. So you spend energy for digestion. The same ATP that I called, the energy molecules made in the mitochondria, that energy is required for digesting the food here. And then for absorption, when I talked about absorption that goes into the liver and goes into the blood and into the liver and everywhere, absorption also needs energy. So this process is called metabolizing the food that we eat and storing it into compartments, into the muscle, liver, brain, wherever we send it to. So that process, so spending energy to make energy is just like spending money to make money. So that is the process that the body is going through, and this is the fundamental concept of when I talk about ATP, adenosine triphosphate, becoming AMP 1 phosphate, and again recycling back, like I mentioned before in my previous talks, to ATP, making energy utilization, and then storing it whenever it is needed. So we're talking about a little bit more in detail about the types of foods and various kinds of signals that you get with various types of foods. So what are those foods? I'm going to talk, and we talked many times about this difference in the food that we are talking about, especially more in reference to specifically with glucose as well as fructose. So I'm going to put glucose in a different color and fructose in a different color, and I'm going to put a different color for energy utilization, which is what we want, and energy storage for a different color. So let's put glucose, like I did before, in glucose molecule in blue, and then let's also put fructose here, which is just to stand out because fructose molecule is completely different, making uric acid and fat and things like that. So we are going to make it in red. Now when both these molecules are going to go into the cell through different pathways, there is an enzyme that metabolizes glucose to go into the cell, and there's an enzyme which we talked about, which is called fructokinase for fructose, and that takes it into the cell. Now in the cell, everything is happening in the mitochondria. The mitochondria, I'm going to put a small picture like this in black. Actually, I'm going to use a different color because the mitochondria are the powerhouses. So I want to put it in brown or orange or red, something of a different color, so that you understand it better. So I'll put one or two like this, which are very small, because the cell has thousands of mitochondria. But I'll put one just for your understanding as a bigger, for your reference, in a bigger size. Now this is where the ATP is made. ATP is the energy. So last time I said that this mitochondria makes ATP. If you remember my previous talk about how energy is made, ATP is I said it's 3 molecules. That's the energy releasing phosphorus molecule, and that in turn, after releasing the energy, the phosphorus, 2 phosphorus molecules becomes AMP. MP is monophosphate, which is only 1 molecule. Now once it becomes 1 molecule, I told you that this goes back to make more ATP. The body is recycling by adding phosphate, again 2 phosphates, through an in-between process called ADP, which is diphosphate. So monophosphate, diphosphate, triphosphate. This is what we talked about. So this process of recycling is made with all these processes are kind of going on in the body with the help of enzymes. So when glucose comes or any food comes, it goes in one direction, it makes enough energy, and when there's enough energy, there is a signal that goes back and stops this enzymatic reaction here. I'm going to put it as negative. That means when there's enough of what we want that is made, the body gives a signal. This is like a regulating, auto-regulating kind of thing where it says that I have made enough, I'm going to stop this reaction anymore. So that's typically what happens normally, and that typically what happens to glucose. So what about fructose? Fructose comes and then does the same thing, makes ATP and AMP, but from AMP it does not give another signal to stop. It actually gives a signal to keep going this way again. So that means this enzyme, where I'm going to list it, it's called fructokinase. It keeps going back in this loop, and it keeps making more and more of that instead of stopping it. How does that happen and what is it? We will talk. So last time I also spoke to you about AMP, and then this A part is the adenine. The adenine is what is going to make the uric acid. Now this is all happening in the mitochondria, by the way. I just put a cell, but everything is happening in the mitochondria, and all this mitochondria, again, more so in terms of where it is happening, is predominantly in the liver, brain and other areas, but mostly in the liver. That's where it is happening, the cells of the liver in the mitochondria. So the uric acid now is accumulating, and we know that, and uric acid gives a wrong signal. So let's see what uric acid does differently. But the uric acid now, it actually inhibits means it stops this process, because there is a very important enzyme here which is actually what we want. I'm going to name that is called AMP kinase. Now kinase is energizing. That means you want more and more of this because it's very favorable for us. So what does AMP kinase do? So if glucose comes, it goes back again in this process by this enzyme, which is AMP kinase. So we want this is favorable. So what does this do? AMP kinase does something which uric acid stops. So which means fructose coming to uric acid stops AMP kinase, and it goes in a different pathway, and that is called as, so it blocks this, and then it favors something called AMPD. That means it's taking out aminase. Aminase is the ammonia, the nitrogen molecule. It's taking out the nitrogen molecule, and it's only keeping it as uric acid to keep going in the cycle instead of stopping it. That means there's no counter regulatory mechanism. It doesn't stop after the end products are formed. So what happens when AMP kinase is stopped, and what happens when AMP deaminase is promoted? To understand that, first we have to know what AMP kinase does. This is what we want. This is for favorable things that we all want. So AMP kinase actually tells the body, do not make fat, burn fat, do not make glucose, do not increase the blood pressure. Now, this is a signaling pathway. AMP kinase is an enzyme that's a signaling pathway. Do not increase the blood pressure and upregulate the metabolism. That means turn up the metabolism. That means turning up energy utilization. Now, that means you are making more ATP and you are using up the energy. Now, on the other hand, it's exactly opposite. That means it's the evil twin. So the evil twin, which means the uric acid takes it around this pathway, is exactly opposite, and what it does is, I'm going to write it in red, which is make more fat, and here actually make more fat, store more fat, increase glucose, power your brain or heart or any organ in the body by increasing the glucose, increase the blood pressure, because it takes you into a survival mode. So our body is trying to perfuse the organs more by increasing the blood pressure, and it also takes it in another way where it ratchet down the metabolism. That means it only takes it in one way, even though the favorable way is to take it through the AMP kinase. It takes it this way. So everything that is opposite and that we don't want. So high sugar, high blood pressure, high fat, everything that we are seeing as we are naming, now you know the mechanism of how this is happening when the uric acid stops the AMP kinase. We are going to talk a little bit more again about AMP kinase in detail later also, because this is important. And what are the signals? I'm going to talk about those signals now. So why is this happening? Because once this happens, the uric acid again goes to glucose and makes it convert to fructose. So if you eat glucose, if you have too much uric acid, that glucose again gets converted to fructose, and the fructose goes this way. So you're going to be in a vicious cycle of making more fat, storing fat, increasing glucose, increasing blood pressure, taking down the metabolism in the wrong pathway of storage and making fat and gaining weight and increasing blood pressure, getting diabetes, things like that. So AMP kinase, this is what we want. We want this to be lightening up, that means you are going to activate it, light up this, and then we don't want this, we want to turn this down. But fructose and uric acid does this to complex mechanisms. Now there are some enzymes that take this pathway. That means burning more fat is stopped by an enzyme. So that means it's going to make more fat. Uric acid makes more fat. I'm going to list that. And also storing more fat is also one more thing that I'm going to list the name of that enzyme, that pathway it goes into. So in terms of glucose, only 20% normally when it gets metabolized can go into a little bit of making fat and storing fat, whereas in case of fructose, 100% goes this way. So AMP kinase is very important. What are those signals? Exercise is one of the best and very powerful signal for activating AMP kinase. I'm going to talk about it next time. Similarly, fasting activates AMP kinase. There are some supplements that also are popular, like quercetin and all, that is already found in the nature's fruit and other natural foods. One more thing is metformin. That's a very popular drug. Now it has been used and tried even for anti-aging. Metformin, some of you who have been on metformin, is a very powerful agent which acts similar to AMP, which acts to activate AMP kinase. So basically these are all fasting mimicking drugs. While fasting and exercise are very powerful, they can mimic what fasting and exercise does. While that's not a substitute, that's between you and your physician. It's a pretty reasonably safe medication to use. So metformin does that, exercise and all that. On the other hand, all the other things that AMP kinase is deactivated and AMP deaminase is activated, which comes from fructose to uric acid, and this pathway is what we don't want to have, and this pathway is what we want to have. I'll go a little bit more in detail about each of those individual signals and also the genetic pathways a little bit for your understanding about how the body gets regulated with 3 different pathways with 3 different kinds of genes for the longevity and for also increasing the energy expenditure and also for our best metabolic health and controlling the growth, and how the signal for survival and longevity, and how the signal for maximizing energy. All those 3 pillars of genetic signals I'll be talking in the next 1 or 2 episodes later. I'll talk to you very soon in Metabolism Made Easy, part 10.